This trip has been extraordinary. As I say, we started here. It's a trip that involved 26,000 miles by air, about 2,500 miles we drove. We visited 5 countries, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Australia, New Zealand.
It is a journey of contrasts, starting with the tea plantations in North Thailand, moving to the rice paddy fields of Laos, and then the mountain mists of the Golden Triangle, home to 6 tribes with differing ethnic origins. We had the opportunity of visiting an Acha village to gain some insight into their way of living. We trekked through tropical rainforests in Cambodia, Australia and New Zealand, thinking beforehand that they might look all the same, but growing to understand the real differences brought about by tropical and more temperate climates. Driving in Australia and New Zealand was a real pleasure, a far cry from the congested southeast of England. The roads were very high standard and hardly any traffic on them. And of course, they drive on the left-hand side. Everywhere you stopped there was a terrific view, whether along the coast or high up and looking down. A real pleasure was going out to Lady Elliot Island on the Great Barrier Reef to do some snorkeling. And then later a visit to Fraser Island, the largest sand island in the world, immense by air and by land. The vast Lake Taupo in New Zealand is another example of glacial activity thousands of years ago. With the Hooker Falls dispensing 220,000 litres of water per second from the lake, enough to fill an Olympic swimming pool every minute. Nearby at Rotorua, we saw many old geezers before their magic. Alongside mud pools and lakes steaming and gurgling with colour that would shame a Dulux card. Then down to the fjords to visit Doubtful Sound, named but not entered by Captain Cook, as he was doubtful there would be enough wind to sail out. Of course, it's in the cities that you feel real life and real differences of culture. Including in Phnom Penh some very different attitudes to safety and inclusion. In Australia, we were intrigued by the continued rivalry between Melbourne and Sydney, with Melbourne being voted the most livable city, and Sydney, of course, being the most iconic, with the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge. And if you look carefully at the top, you'll see some brave souls chain-ganged on top to get a better view. One of the features of our trip was the amazing contrast in weather.
I'm feeling pretty cold at the moment.
No, how you really feel?
Oh, how I'm really bloody cold.
down the road that way in Riddles Creek, where a number of properties have been lost. We were with a family who were battling desperately to try to save theirs. They had a number of sheds that were engulfed by fire in front of us. The flames were incredibly hot. There was also a lot of radiant heat, and the wind was what was really pushing.
But despite the emergency, the Aussies are very laid back. And at Hall's Gap, they continue to enjoy their annual jazz festival. It's the richness of cultures and beliefs that fascinate. Very good. Yeah, excellent. You do your trick. Can you do your trick? Well, I don't know if that's a trick. Hmm? How about this for a welcome? Not forgetting a different kind of embrace at the Sydney Gay Mardi Gras. River accommodation is a must for the poorer in Bangkok and by Tonle Sap in Cambodia. And for a different reason for the rich of Noosa in Queensland. The differences played out in our accommodation, a rather basic bamboo hut, to a floating bedroom, to a magnificent B&B overlooking Queenstown. We wanted to know more about the indigenous peoples, and especially the Aborigines, with their long 40,000-year history. There are now about 5% of the 25 million Australian population, but I have to say celebrated more in the national museums than in everyday life. In Siem Reap there was a different kind of celebration with the magnificence and beauty of the temples at the Angkor complex.
And this you can see Cambodian military, they are walking, but for the Kenyan commander, they ride on the back of elephant or horse.
In Phnom Penh we contrasted the opulence of the royal palace with the dark and distressing history of life under Pol Pot during the late 70s, when 40% of the 7 million population died through starvation or murder. We visited the killing fields and the notorious SO19 prison, once an innocent-looking school, where now one survivor comes daily to remind us of the horror.
Arrested to this prison when he was 48 years old. Yeah. So after this regime, only him alone, because his wife and his 4 children already assassinated and killed him. He is mechanic. He can fix typewriter.
Very good.
That's why they survive.
And what of the wildlife? This was in great abundance, with the elephants on the banks of the Mekong, and then a full range of mammals and birds up close and personal across Australia. We travelled using very different forms of transport. Comfortable river barges on the Mekong, fast, flat-bottomed boats on the Nam U River, small aircraft with highly skilled pilots to land on unseeming short runways. The splendour of sailing boats on the fjords. And to cap it off, an unforgettable helicopter ride to take us to the top of Fox Glacier on the South Island, New Zealand. Landing on the snow very early in the morning for the best look. In the afternoon, getting a closer look with crampons on.
Our favourite town of all, Queenstown. Actually, I suppose we have lots of favourite things here, but it is the most amazing place. And this place has really brought together an awful lot of what I think New Zealand has to offer. And that is fantastic scenery. Pretty good weather. The weather hasn't been like this all the time, but it's been pretty good. But the most amazing mountain scenes, developed facilities around here, lots of risk taking. I mean, everywhere you look here, someone's throwing themselves off something or
And if you don't fancy bungee jumping, then why don't you just put your skateboard on and proceed down the mountain at electrifying speeds. Or you can just join in the fun in Wellington with the annual Dragon Boat Racing.
Then down the inside, Hutt Valley High School 1, and on the high, Horamaka on the far side. But a clean sweep out of lane number 3, number 1 back under the bridge, Hutt Valley High School.
So now it's left for us to savour the memories of our 9-week trip and get saving for the next.